Temple of the Dog. Hunger Strike. I got the word temple. We're talking food. I think we've played this song before, but you gotta love it. Stealing food from the mouths of decadence. It's all about the food. Temple of the Dog. When I get feet on the Bible hills, when my cup's already over. Go. Little Temple of the Dog always soothes my soul. Chris Cornell, what a great rock voice. You know how I feel about that. We are River Valley Civilizations. We're in the middle of learning about the Sumerians of Mesopotamia. Okay, and today we're going to take, this is Global 2.6 in your notes. We're still under the Sumerians of Mesopotamia. I think in our previous lesson, we checked it out from the point of view of a historian. We checked out the ancient Sumerians of Mesopotamia. We looked at the geography through the eyes of a geographer. Today, we're going to check out the culture a little bit. We're going to check out the anthropology of the Sumerians of Mesopotamia, and we're going to take a look at their economy. Okay, just heading down our list, right? Examining things through the eyes of these social scientists, trying to gain in-depth, greater understanding of the ancient Sumerians of Mesopotamia in this early river valley civilization. Let's check out the culture. I'm going to swing back behind the computer here, and we're going to shift over to our slideshow, and then we'll come back to the board and add what we need to. Looking at things through the eyes of a anthropologist and checking out the culture of these ancient Sumerians, we see that a big part of their focus was on prayer, right? Building these temples, the architecture itself being part of the culture, building a place for prayer, these temples, and the worship of many gods, which is called polytheism. We're going to have to get that on the board here in a minute. And these gods that they worshipped, they almost all had to do with food production. I mean, think about it, right? Like the sun god. Why pray to the sun? You need the sun to grow food. The rain god. Why pray to the rain god? You need rain to grow food, etc., and on and on. Now, not only did they have these gods that were key for food production, they also had gods to celebrate many animal spirits. Why celebrate these animals? Again, the domestication of animals during the Neolithic time period was huge, right? And using those animals as food sources and as laborers to help them achieve things, almost like using them as tools, these animals were to be celebrated. And the last thing that these temples and these places of prayer were used for, this idea of fertility and procreation. Now, procreation is a big fancy word, right? We're really just talking about making babies here, having children. Why was having children and having lots of children so important? You don't even have to go back too far in American history to figure that out, right? If you go back further into American history, we see that families used to have lots of babies. Why did they have lots of babies? They needed workers on the farm, okay? And the praying for having lots of healthy children did have its sort of cultural point, right? Or its cultural purpose. And that purpose was more food production. We'll come back to the language here in a moment. Let's shift over to, I'm sorry, not the food production. We'll come back to the language in a moment if I misspoke. And let's come back here and get some notes on the board. So when we're talking about the culture of these ancient Sumerians, this is very, very food-driven. Food was the driving force. You gotta eat. You gotta eat. Right? So this is food-driven. This is a driving force in culture. And ways in which it was food-driven, we see these temples for worship. And almost all of the gods And there were many of them. That's polytheism. That means the celebration of many gods. And almost all of these gods were, again, food driven. Right? The purpose of praying to these gods was for food. So the culture, again, reinforced. The whole culture was food driven. They built these temples of worship. They worshiped many gods. These gods that they worshiped were driven by food, right? Or it was driven by their desire to get food, these ancient Sumerians. And of course, the last piece is the sort of like fertility and having children. That was a cultural piece too. They wanted as many healthy children as possible. Maybe our ideas of a traditional family with a traditional wife, with a traditional set of only a few kids, this would have been very different back then. It was about having as many healthy descendants as possible, and these children would become laborers on the farms, taking care of the animals. Farming the agriculture. So when we talk about food driven up here, we're talking about animals and sun and rain, agriculture, and everything was food driven. Okay, so we get the point here, right? This is a culture. The ancient Sumerians were almost like obsessed with having enough food to survive. And of course, if that's we talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if that's your sort of base pyramid, we talked about your physiological needs and your safety being things that you have to sort of build first to have a strong base of your society, this is huge, right? And we see it kind of come through in this area of ancient Sumeria. Let's shift over to the economics. Oh no, first, I'm going to have to make a little bit of room here. I'm going to make some room right here. We've missed one little piece of the culture that we're going to come back to, and that is the fact, what distinguished these Sumerians from maybe their predecessors, the Neanderthal, is their ability to communicate. So let's check out their language, which is a big piece of their culture. And if I shift over here again, swing over here on the slideshow presentation, here is cuneiform, their language, the language of the ancient Sumerians of Mesopotamia. It's one of the earliest written languages that our archaeologists have unearthed and found. It, of course, was meant to share ideas, which is what separated Homo sapiens from Neanderthals, that we could share our ideas both by having a spoken language and a written language at this point. And cuneiform, we could find lots of different evolutions of it over time. It probably started very simplistic and became more and more complex as time went on. If I take a look at cuneiform, here's my pronunciation. Let's see how I did.
Cuneiform.
Cuneiform. I say cuneiform, cuneiform, cuneiform. I say tomato, you say tomato.
Cuneiform.
Cuneiform. All right, and here is the archaeological evidence that this cuneiform did in fact exist. Just wanted to check it out. It's kind of like a series of lines with little triangles. You could almost imagine it being like a modern day alphabet, right? And the sharing of ideas was quite extensive, which allowed the culture to grow and flourish. Shifting back to the economics, we see that the economics is also going to be very food driven. This is an economy that was almost completely based on the trade of food, which we will refer to as a barter economy. A barter economy, if I barter with you, I am trading with you. So this is an economy completely based on trade. They may have had money, but not in the traditional sense that we think of today, not as a currency where the money holds a specific value, but perhaps their tokens, which you see down here, these shekel tokens, perhaps they were used as a token symbolizing a bundle of wheat. In fact, the word shekel, right, comes from a shekel, which translated from this time period actually means a bundle of wheat. So they had all sorts of agricultural products they were growing: wheat, flax, grain. And if you wanted to purchase or trade your food, the wheat or the flax or the grain, if you wanted to trade that, a bundle of that, you could get a token. And if you traded it in for a token, the token could then be used for, and we won't get into the logistics of this, kids. Again, this is not a traditional family setup, but producing as many children as possible to be laborers to produce more food was very important. And so the token could then be used in exchange to create more workers, which would create more food, which could get you more tokens, which would then create more children and relatives to work. Okay, and it was a very, very, it was an economic system very much based on food, right? And trading food for things that would get you the ability to have the laborers to produce even more food. We see the overriding important factor here, right? It's all about the food. Swinging back over to our notes and just polishing up our notes here, the language. Cuneiform, and this was used as a cultural diffusion because it allowed for the sharing of ideas. This is a written language. Oh boy, I should have fit that in there. This is a written language. Not a spoken language, but a written language that allowed for the sharing of ideas. And the economics, as we just saw on the slideshow, this is also very much food driven. The barter system, 3 stars. We need to know what bartering is. The barter system was a system based on trade, and particularly trading food. These coins or tokens were called shekels, which literally translated as a bundle of wheat or other grain, right? It's a bundle of grain. Wheat, flax, maybe something of that nature. Okay, and these tokens would then be exchanged for the purposes of having children. And the more children you had, that meant more labor for the field, so you could produce more food and trade, have enough to feed yourself and your offspring, all of your children, and have enough left over to trade for shekels. And this cycle repeats and continues and continues. Again, right? I mean, what are we trying to get out of this? We see the importance of living in a river valley to produce food, and the food becomes consuming, right? The food drives their culture. The food drives their entire economy. And like the whole purpose of having kids in order to have laborers on the farm as a service, right? In order to service the farm, in order to produce more farm goods. This is it, right? Totally driven by food. It's a little bit like my stomach. Thinking of which, I'm getting a little hungry right now. I think I'm going to run. Next episode, maybe we'll check out the politics of this time period, and that'll be a wrap for ancient Sumeria. Adios!